the collision of two worlds. Amelia Kensington had everything: wealth, beauty, and a future laid out in gold. Born into one of New York's most powerful families, she had never known struggle. Her days were filled with lavish parties, designer shopping sprees, and exclusive charity galas. But despite all the glamour, she felt empty, like she was living a life that had been chosen for her, rather than one she truly wanted. One rainy evening, as she sped through the dimly lit streets of Manhattan in her sleek black Mercedes, her mind was elsewhere. She had just stormed out of a gala, sick of the fake smiles and shallow conversations. Her mother's voice still echoed in her head. "Amelia, you need to stop acting like a child. Your future husband is in that room." Frustrated, she gripped the wheel tighter, barely noticing the red light until it was too late. She swerved sharply to avoid hitting someone, a man standing on the sidewalk. Her tires skidded on the wet pavement, and with a sickening crunch, the car slammed into a street lamp. Dazed but unharmed, Amelia groaned and unbuckled her seatbelt. Stepping out, she found herself face to face with the man she had almost hit. He was tall, with disheveled dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a rugged look that suggested he had seen better days. His clothes were worn, his face unshaven. "You okay, princess?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Amelia blinked. No one had called her that before, not in a way that sounded both mocking and amused. I almost hit you," she stammered. "Yeah, I noticed," he said dryly. "Good thing you have quick reflexes." "Car? Not so much." She turned to see her Mercedes with a smashed headlight and groaned. "My father's going to kill me. Looks like Daddy can afford a new one," he muttered. Her eyes snapped to him. "Excuse me?" He shrugged. "Nothing." A moment of silence stretched between them. Amelia wasn't used to being spoken to so casually, especially by a stranger who, from the looks of it, was homeless. She glanced at his torn jacket and the small backpack at his feet. "Do you need help?" she asked hesitantly. He laughed, a rough yet oddly charming sound. "That's a new one. Usually, people like you cross the street to avoid people like me." Her face flushed. "I didn't mean it like that." "Relax, princess. I'm used to it." He turned to leave. "Wait," she blurted. "What's your name?" He paused, then glanced back at her. "Jake." And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the city. An unlikely encounter. The next morning, Amelia couldn't stop thinking about Jake. His sharp blue eyes haunted her thoughts, making her question everything she thought she knew about the world. On a whim, she returned to the spot where she had met him, walking cautiously through the streets lined with makeshift tents and bundled-up figures. She found him sitting on a bench, sipping from a cup of cheap coffee. He looked up as she approached. Well, he said. "Didn't think I'd see you again, princess." "Stop calling me that," she huffed, sitting beside him. "What should I call you then?" "Amelia." "Amelia," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "Fancy name." She glanced at him. "You don't seem surprised that I came back." He smirked. "Rich girl wandering around a rough neighborhood? Either you're lost or curious. I'm guessing the second." She frowned. "You make a lot of assumptions about me. I've seen enough people like you to know how they think." His tone wasn't bitter, just matter of fact. "But you're different, aren't you? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here." Amelia hesitated. "Why are you homeless?" Jake tensed slightly, but covered it with a shrug. "Life happened. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got for now." Amelia sighed, realizing she wouldn't get more out of him yet. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a $100 bill. "Here." Jake's expression hardened. "I don't take handouts." "It's not a handout," she insisted. "Just buy yourself a decent meal." He stood up, shaking his head. "You can't fix people with money, Amelia." She watched as he walked away again, leaving her with her untouched bill and a strange feeling in her chest. Breaking barriers. Determined, Amelia kept visiting the area, bringing coffee and sandwiches. At first, Jake refused, but eventually, he started accepting small gestures, not money but conversation, company. She learned that he had once been a promising architect, but betrayal and loss had led him to the streets. He never gave full details, but each day, she uncovered a little more. As weeks passed, Jake softened. He started teaching her things she had never considered: how to see the city beyond its wealth, how to listen to people's stories, how to survive with nothing. And in return, she found ways to help him without wounding his pride. She connected him with an old friend who offered him a job at a construction firm. She didn't tell him she had arranged it, knowing he wouldn't accept it otherwise. But just when things seemed to be looking up, Amelia's family found out. "You're ruining your reputation," her mother hissed. "You have no idea who this man really is. He's more real than anyone in our world," Amelia shot back. Her father's warning was worse. "If you don't stop seeing him, I'll cut you off." It was a test. A cruel one. That night, she met Jake on their usual bench, her heart pounding. "If I lost everything, would you still want me?" she asked. Jake frowned. "What kind of question is that? I need to know." He studied her, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't care about money, Amelia. I care about you." Tears pricked her eyes. "Then let's leave. Start over somewhere else." But Jake shook his head. "You can't run from who you are." Neither of them realized that forces were already in motion to pull them apart. The cost of love. Amelia's world unraveled faster than she had anticipated. Within days of her father's ultimatum, she found her credit cards frozen, her luxury apartment lease revoked, and her name whispered among Manhattan's elite as a fallen princess. But she didn't care, not about the money, the parties, or the disapproving glances from people she once considered friends. What terrified her was the silence from Jake. For 3 days, she couldn't find him. His usual spot was empty, the bench cold in the autumn wind. Panic settled in her chest. Had he left? Did he regret what they had? Then, on the 4th day, she saw him. But he wasn't alone. He stood outside a construction site, wearing a hard hat, speaking with the foreman. Relief flooded Amelia, but it was short-lived. Before she could call out, a black car pulled up beside her. "Get in," her father's voice commanded from inside. She hesitated, then slid into the back seat. "I hope you're done with this foolishness," he said, his tone unreadable. "Because it's about to be done for you." Amelia's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" He handed her a folder. Inside were photographs. Jake speaking with men in alleyways, exchanging envelopes, disappearing into a shelter late at night. "You think you know him," her father continued. "But he's hiding things. Look at the last page." She did. And what she saw stole her breath. A mugshot. Jake's face, younger but unmistakable, stared back at her. The charge? Assault and battery. Amelia swallowed hard. This isn't him. Her father sighed. "People don't change, Amelia. You're blinded by whatever fantasy you've built around him. Let this go, and I'll reinstate everything. Your accounts, your apartment, your future." She clenched the folder in her hands, staring out the window where Jake stood, laughing at something a coworker said. Could he really be dangerous? Could he have hurt someone? Or was this just another way for her father to control her? She had to find out the truth. Jake's past. That night, Amelia found Jake in a small diner, nursing a cup of coffee. She slid into the booth across from him, setting the folder down. His eyes darkened when he saw it. "Where did you get that?" "My father," she admitted. "Is it true?" Jake exhaled, leaning back. "Yeah." Her stomach twisted. "You were arrested?" He nodded. "It was 6 years ago. I was engaged. My best friend and I started an architecture firm together. We had big dreams, big plans. But one day, I found out my fiancé and my best friend had been sleeping together. They stole from the company, left me with nothing. I confronted him. It got physical." Amelia held her breath. And I put him in the hospital." A long silence stretched between them. "I lost everything that day," Jake continued. "My business, my reputation, my future. No one would hire me after that. I drank. I stopped caring. One bad decision led to another, and before I knew it, I was on the streets." Amelia's heart ached. "You're not that man anymore." Jake met her gaze. Maybe not. But your father's right about one thing. I come with baggage. So do I, she whispered. Jake reached across the table, taking her hand. Are you sure about this? Because your life is going to be harder with me in it. She squeezed his hand. I don't care. Against the odds. Amelia walked away from her old life. She got a small job at a bookstore, learning for the first time what it meant to earn her way. She and Jake found a tiny apartment together, a far cry from the luxury she had known, but somehow it felt more like home than anywhere she had ever lived. Jake worked his way up in construction, proving himself until he earned a stable position. He started designing again, sketching in the evenings while Amelia read beside him. But the world wasn't kind to their love. Her family disowned her. Former friends turned their backs. And Jake's past followed him like a shadow. One night, Amelia came home to find him staring at an eviction notice. We'll figure it out, she said, forcing a smile. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. Maybe your father was right. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her.
No.
He wasn't. We are going to make it. And they did. Months later, a small firm took a chance on Jake's designs. He worked tirelessly, proving his talent, until one of his sketches caught the eye of a major developer. They offered him a contract, a real one. When he came home that night, paycheck in hand, he pulled Amelia into his arms. We did it, he whispered. She smiled. I never doubted us. Epilogue, love, rebuilt. Years later, Amelia and Jake stood on the balcony of their modest but beautiful home. He had built it himself, brick by brick, a testament to everything they had fought for. Her father never forgave her, but her mother visited in secret, watching as Amelia built a life far different from the one that had been planned for her. Jake's past never disappeared, but it no longer defined him. And Amelia? She had found what money could never buy. Love. Purpose. A life truly her own. And as they stood there, hands entwined, Jake whispered, I was wrong, you know. About what? She asked. He smiled. People can change.
The end.